You made it to the last and best session of Teams, unless you're keen to hear Carlos. I hear he's handsome and accomplished and all of those things. I'm sure he'll be great, but otherwise you've made it to the second best and second last session of Teams, so well done. My name is Will Carey-Hill. I look after strategy and transformation for our delivery at Suncorp, which is a very long title, but effectively my team looks after Suncorp's system of work. So about 10 years ago, I met a guy by the name of John Smart who wrote Sooner, Saver, Happier and led successful transformation at Barclays Bank. And if you haven't read his stuff, it's very good. Please check it out. And we were having a chat, and he said, you know what, Will? Most organizations don't have anyone who actually looks after the most important system in their organization, and that's the system that most of the work flows through. And I said, that's it. That's what I want to do with my life, and that's what I do now. So I look after the system of work at Suncorp, and I'm very excited to talk to you about how we implemented a living system of work over the last 5 years, and then how we're leveraging Atlassian's system of work combined with the work that we've done to kind of build what we're calling our intelligent system of work. So very happy to share that story with you over our time together. So how did I get into doing this type of work? Well, I've flown all the way from Sydney to be here with you today. A few Aussies in the crowd. Where are the Aussies? Represent, well done. You may hear I have a terrible Australian accent. It sounds much more Canadian because I'm originally from Toronto, Canada, so spent most of my life growing up there. So my story starts, like most good Canadian stories, on the ice hockey rink. I was playing ice hockey. It was the first game of the season, first play of the game, and I crashed into the boards and fractured my femur. Anyone else fractured their femur? No, glad to hear it. Happy to have taken that one for the group. I don't recommend it. It is an incredibly painful experience. So my femur looks just like that. I've got what's called an L plate in the distal end of my femur. First question I get asked after sharing that story is, did someone push you? Did they body check you? Did they hit you with a stick? No, it was just me. I fell and crashed into the boards. Second question I get asked is, do you set off the security at the airport? And look, unfortunately, no, I don't even get that distinction. Somehow they've managed to make it so that I can make it through security. So I was 15, like many 15-year-old sort of active young men, sport was my life, and I had that taken away from me. And little did I know, sometimes, you know, life sends you a curve and you don't know where you're going to end up. And that's what got me really interested in the body as a system. And so I was hospitalized for 2 weeks, and my thigh shrunk to the size of my forearm. So the muscle had completely atrophied. And by being bedridden for a couple of weeks and going through that trauma, I also had forgotten how to walk. So I had to relearn and reestablish my movement pattern in terms of having to walk. But that got me really interested in this system that I'd taken for granted, which was the system that allowed me to do movement. And I started to dedicate myself. I became a biomedical engineer, or worked in biomechanics. So, you know, the people who put those crazy little dots, like the video game creators, on people and measure their movements. Interestingly, biomechanists, our measures are work, velocity, very similar measures to what a lot of us look at. So that's how I first got interested in human systems of work. I then went on to work in neuromechanics. So that's adding the brain to the body as a system of work, and really how our strategies and our decision-making really influences what we do and how we execute things. So I'd love to say this was a well-crafted pattern where I was going to end up on stage talking about a system of work, but I had no idea doing that type of work was going to lead me here to be in front of all of you today talking about this. And interestingly, in a human system of work, any idea how quickly we can make decisions, how quickly our brain operates? Maybe not as fast as a high-powered computer in terms of processing speed, but around about 100 milliseconds. And so my research, I was looking at, we would take athletes and we would drop them off a stage about this high, and they would land on a floor, and it was either hard or soft. They didn't know what it was, and we wanted to see if they could very quickly, upon touching the floor, come up with a strategy to deal with how they would land. And their decisions were around 250 milliseconds, so a quarter of a second. Now, I don't know if any of you has had to seek a strategic decision recently, but I imagine it took longer than 250 milliseconds to get that decision made. In most organizations, we know it takes a lot longer than that, but we also know from the way the body is set up as a living system of work that it's possible to get very fast feedback. It's possible to make decisions and change strategies very quickly, and it's possible to put all that in place to be able to execute. So using those principles, that's kind of how we've set up the living system of work at Suncorp. Who is Suncorp? We have about a third of the Australian insurance market. So that dot over there is close to Sydney, where myself and my colleague Kate, give a wave, Kate, hello. We're from Sydney, and our business is heavily based in Brisbane as well. Those are two areas that experience a lot of weather events, which I'll go into a little bit. We've got maybe around 15,000 people, and with some partners and contractors, takes us up to about 20,000, about 10,000 active users in our system of work. Been around a long time, so a legacy financial service organization. So if you can do it in insurance and you can do it in a 100-year-old company, we think that you'll be able to take some of the learnings that we've applied. It's a complex business, so multiple countries, multiple regulated industry, different regulators to deal with, and across multiple brands as well. So that has certainly added to the complexity of how we operate. And we have, I think, coming up to a 22-year partnership with Atlassian. So we were saying that last night to someone, and they said, "Oh, so literally Mike and Scott just went over and set up your system when you originally did it." So like just less than 1 year after Atlassian was established, we became a partner. So we've been around a long time in terms of working together with Atlassian. What am I going to talk to you about today? Firstly, what was the catalyst that led to change for Suncorp? And there's a couple of things that drove us to try to implement our system of work. Then how have we what's the approach that we've taken to building our living system of work over the last 5 years that has led to some good results for us? How are we adding AI to that and building an intelligent system of work and leveraging Atlassian's system of work across what we do? And then lastly, what's been the impact of all of that, and what have we learned from those attempts? So when we started, which was about 5 years ago, Suncorp had a few losing seasons as a business, so it was doing it a bit tough. We'd taken a few chances, we'd tried a few things, not all of it had panned out, like many businesses, and our executive set a very aggressive 3-year strategy to kind of turn that around. Partway through that strategic process, we decided to sell. At the time, we had a bank as part of our business as well. It was the largest non-major bank in Australia, and so we decided to sell our bank and become a pure play standalone general insurer. It may sound easy to sell a bank, a bit like Matt Damon, I Bought a Zoo, like that movie, but selling a bank versus carving that bank out from your business, separating all of your data and your customer data, separating all of your technology systems, as you can imagine, that was a massive piece of work. And then during that time period as well, both Australia and New Zealand experience 1 in a 100-year period weather events. So I had come from banking previously. I had no idea how much weather could affect your business when you work in insurance, and that we are very attuned to what is going on with the weather, and that really impacts our customers greatly. There are times where insurance is not a sexy business, but when you are needed in moments like that, that's when you really see the value of what it is that we do, and equally, that's when our teams really rally together to get things right for our customers. So execution and executing on a lot of complex work was the most important factor to that 3-year strategy. And there were significant headwinds as well. So it wasn't like we had a clear path, really easy direction to achieving that strategy. Not only was it a very aggressive strategy, but it was also staring into some significant headwinds. So why should you listen to what we have to say? What results did we get from it? That is our actual share price that you see climbing there. That's not some neat sort of diagram that my team built. There will be some cool animations. I'll see a little Easter egg for you. Try and point out the one that our youngest member of the team had to do over the course of pulling this together. But we more than doubled business value over the last 5 years. So for a legacy business in a pretty mature industry, not easy to do to see those types of results. We say that we've kind of tripled throughput. Truthfully, it's much more than that. When we started this journey, Suncorp was delivering 100 projects and programs a year. This year, we'll deliver over 1,000 initiatives. And Kate, correct me if I'm wrong, but in Q1, I think we had 500 initiatives planned. So you can see from a productivity perspective, the system of work has absolutely delivered on large, complex, high volume, high velocity execution. We're really happy about the fact that our teams are happier and healthier in terms of how they operate as well. That was the first measure we looked at, is do our teams like working in this way, and is that contributing to how they're productive? And then, as we said, we were able to, through that period, execute a bank sale and transition as part of that as well, which we wouldn't have been able to do if we hadn't set up our system of work. So during that time in setting up our system of work, luckily we made the choice. Where were we going to start with getting people onto our system of work? We started with our home claims and motor claims businesses. And we're very glad we did, because about a year after that, this happened. And many areas of our country were underwater. And as you can see, nearly 50,000 people impacted, 46,000 home claims in a very compressed period of time. Around 3,000 businesses, and just under 9,000 people's cars significantly impacted by the weather event. 1 in a 100 year, in fact, I think 1 in 200 year weather event for Australia. We got through that, and then it hit New Zealand. And this image in particular, I had just moved from New Zealand, from Auckland to Sydney, and my apartment is like literally just outside of this image here. So I was sitting there in Sydney watching on the news, and I basically saw my apartment floating by. It was unbelievable. And to give you an idea of how much time this took, most of that damage was done in 6 hours. So this is about a day's worth of rain, but it's literally the skies opening up for 6 hours and just dumping water onto New Zealand. To give you a view of the quantum, the total dollar value that New Zealand paid out in insurance claims for just this one event, which was mostly 6 hours, was greater than the entire previous year in terms of environmental damage. And that year was the highest year on record in New Zealand. So one weather event like this, and all of a sudden you have a record year's worth of claims coming through the door. So as you can imagine, in terms of executing on that for us as a business, puts a lot of pressure on our ability to execute, and it puts a lot of pressure on the systems and stuff that we have put in place in order to be able to do that. To add the human element to that, our New Zealand CEO kind of got in front of this and said, this happened in about late January, early February. He said, look, I want all New Zealanders home for Christmas. And they were able to get all but 7 of our customers home for Christmas. But that's still a really long period of time that people are out of their home for something like this. So that's when the human element of delivering for our customers and our ability to execute for them becomes mission critical. So what did we do to build our living system of work that has allowed us to execute against all of this? We had a strong history in kind of adaptive and incremental execution and ways of working, as you heard from how long we've had a partnership with Atlassian. So really, we were one of the first 2 organizations in APAC to kind of move in this direction. And then, like a lot of organizations, we kind of swung back to a much more traditional governance heavy project, heavy program management approach to how we execute. And over the last 5 years, we've kind of reinvigorated our approach to high velocity, customer obsessed execution. It took us about 6 months to get our home claims and motor claims areas up and running, and maybe 18 months to reach full scale where all of our teams were working in a unified system of work. Shortly after that, we established a value realization office. So we moved away from project and program management to a unified system of work with an office that looks at how much value we're delivering. And as we said, about 3 years on, we were starting to deliver about 3 times the throughput that we had previously. We're hoping, as we add some of the intelligent automation and bringing AI capability across what we're doing to it, that we'll reach that fly level. And the CIO said to me the other day, "Well, what's after fly? What happens when we go beyond 10x?" And I had a mini heart attack. And then I said, "Well, fair question. We actually do think we'll go beyond that, and we will start to see 20 or 30x execution in our future." So we'll talk a bit about how we think we might be able to do that. So how did we get? What were kind of the cornerstones on which we built our living system of work? The first was we organized all of our teams around the outcomes that we wanted to deliver, and we moved away from just managing outcomes to actually structuring outcomes into what we do. I think that's absolutely critical as we start to think about strategy collection and focus and what it brings. First thing is, have you structured alignment between your execution and your outcome and your strategies? Second thing was, again, we moved away from sort of the Oprah style of project management of you get a project, you get a project, you get a project, right, into everything flows through one unified system of work, and we have a system that actually now governs the system instead of governing the projects. That was a big shift for us as well. We descaled our release and deployment. Instead of we were a traditional kind of big bang view. We still have some pretty big design up front, large release elements to how we execute, but that was another big shift, was just descaling our execution so we could get much more quick, shorter turns in terms of units of value. Our governance was set up that you used to have to go and talk to cyber, you have to go and talk to compliance, you'd have to go and talk to risk, and that really slowed down our execution. We pivoted that to build all of our governance into our system of work and brought all of the governance to our teams as opposed to them having to go and get sign off from all of those areas. And we really connected a unified system of work. So what does that look like? So let's start with the brain signal or the impulse. On the left-hand side there, you'll see a pretty traditional view of a strategy that many large publicly traded organizations have. Anyone have an organizational strategy that looks somewhat like that? See a few nods, fantastic. So pretty static, sits in PowerPoint. We pivoted that to actually structuring that into a standardized work breakdown where we have across our enterprise strategic imperatives. Example of that might be growing gross written premium in insurance. So it's the growth side of our insurance business. We might have targets across the enterprise to do that, but then our consumer insurance business will have separate targets to say our commercial insurance business. And so we've got what we call strategic imperatives that sit underneath that and that are aligned to those lines of businesses. We then have outcomes that our teams go after that. We call those missions. So it's teams, 1, 2, 3, sometimes 4 teams delivering on a mission. And that's really, what's the customer outcome or user outcome that those teams are really trying to drive. So if they drive enough of those outcomes, we should get the business impact that we're after, which is delivering on the strategic imperative. And then down at kind of our team of team and teams levels, we have initiatives, epics, and stories, pretty similar to most organizations that have something along those lines. This step is absolutely key in aligning all of your work, and not just your strategically aligned work, not just your product aligned work, not just your customer aligned work, but regulatory work, small system enhancements, platform hardening. All of our work lines up underneath outcomes, and then the strategy that it is aligned to as well. That was a massive step for us as an organization. As you can imagine, aligning 1,000 initiatives up to strategy was a big early first step, but once we were able to do that, it was a huge unlock for us as an organization. Second thing is, I think you need an aligned circulatory system. So in some organizations, you might have digital work that kind of flows in a different way to large program work that is actually governed separately. We govern all our work in a unified fashion so that it all flows through the same system of work. That's huge in particular for our downstream teams, like our platform teams, our infrastructure teams. And you can see on the screen here, that's the animation that my poor grad had to literally do with his Apple Pencil. Very high-tech animation. He's very proud of it, but that's literally him tracing through what we call our racetrack, which is how all of our work is executed. And you can see how that work breakdown that we showed, how it flows through our actual system of execution, from strategic goal setting down through to detailed delivery planning, down through to our actual increments or sprints where our teams are delivering. The stable backbone of our living system work is our planning cadence. And there's Harry again, tracing with his Apple Pencil, doing an awesome job, taking him back to his early years of school as he animates his presentation for me. This planning cadence, we don't think that's going to go away as we start to automate and add AI to what we're doing. In fact, we think it's going to be more critical. Because as we know, one of the big risks is sort of the laziness of critical thinking that can start to come through when you can auto-populate a lot of these things, these cadences, and the review that we put around, are we doing the right work? Should we even be doing this work? Is it going to deliver on what we were hoping to deliver? And then have we set up the plans in the way that we need to, is absolutely critical for stabilizing our entire system of work. Our tiered system of guardrails. So the guardrail system for us, we've automated as much as possible or set up for automation what we call our level 1 guardrails. An example of that might be your cybersecurity standards or your engineering standards or architectural standards, our secure development lifecycle, our brand and marketing guidelines. All of our teams have a view of those level 1 guardrails, and we've built those into how they actually execute in terms of the system of work. Our level 2 is what we call our safety teams. So sitting alongside that might be a risk expert or a solution architect, someone who actually brings the expertise to ensure that we're safe. And our level 3 is for those really kind of complex situations. We can escalate to a forum or a council that may need to get involved. That was a huge shift for us as an organization to move away from committees deciding everything to flipping that on its head and only having it roll up to that level 3 by exception. And 80% of our work is governed with kind of business rules as code, if you will, from a guardrail perspective. And I would say if you're looking to set up a hyper-fast system of execution, you need a really good set of brakes. And in fact, you want to start with your brakes if you're going to build a high-velocity way of executing. So how are we adding AI and building in the intelligent capability across that? What's different today? Well, as we know, the move to SaaS and cloud has kind of removed those infrastructure barriers to how we execute, hence why things are just moving so quickly in terms of SaaS systems, but also obviously AI and Gen AI capability being added to that. So it's absolutely a different time, and we know that in order for us to deliver at that hyper scale and that hyper pace, it's the socio-technical engineering that we have to work through. So it's actually not just the systems of execution we're building, but how we really bring our people on that journey. As I think all of you know, if Atlassian stopped building AI capability right now, most of our organizations would still be a few years away from being able to take advantage of all the capability that exists today. It won't be the technical capability that is not there. It will be our people's ability to work in a new system of work. And so hence why we're doubling down on how we add better tech, better AI to our system of work. In our evolving system of work, we think are seeing that our teams will spend more time setting context, defining goals. Are we doing the right work? Setting those execution constraints and establishing and refining and reviewing the guardrails. Much less time, obviously, tapping the keys themselves, and much more time in these spaces, which is a big shift for them, because we are codifying how we work, and we are codifying our system of work, and therefore we have the ability to put more of it into the Atlassian system of work, and as an example, and automate as much as possible. So, how are we making that shift? 5 key areas of focus for us. The first is obviously AI-augmented goal setting and achievement orientation. Not sure about many of you, but value definition is a capability in our organization. We're pretty good at defining the widget or the thing. We're not so good at defining the value that that's going to deliver or the change that that's going to deliver. The great news is now we can augment that with some really great AI capability to build that capability within our organization. Measurement. We've gone, as we said, from 100 projects and programs to over 1,000, 500 in Q1 this year alone. So we may be at 10,000 initiatives at some point soon. As you can imagine, our CFO goes, how are you measuring the value I'm getting for all of that? Which is a very fair question. So that's another capability, the ability to measure the value that we're getting across a highly scaled view of execution, really critical. Our end-to-end delivery lifecycle, we just think that's going to be supercharged going forward, and great to see some of the announcements here this week around the software collection. I just think that's going to be a huge unlock for us. Our governance and compliance, as you can imagine, in a heavily regulated business, take a guess how many artifacts our teams had to complete to get one piece of change through. Any thoughts? 5, 10, Jono? 35, double that, and then add 10. 85 artifacts to complete one piece of change. And it's not even the artifacts. A lot of those fields are just duplicative fields that right now our teams are spending a lot of effort on that just isn't value add. So the ability to, out of the box with the system of work, automate so much of that, and at least get to a 40 or 50% accurate first draft for our teams is going to be an absolute game changer. And as we know in governance and compliance, you cut off one head and 2 grow back. With cloud, with AI, that governance is just growing, right? So this is just a massive unlock for our teams and their ability to execute. We also think that teams are probably going to get even smaller because they'll have agentic capability sitting alongside them. They'll have greater capability being added to their teams. So we're talking about the fact that that sort of average team size of 8 to 12 is going to come down to maybe be like 4 to 6, some very high velocity, small, high trust teams. That doesn't mean we will necessarily need less teams. It means we can go after more by kind of cell dividing those teams that we have. So across the Atlassian system of work, you can see where those 5 kind of key elements land. And I'll just very briefly walk you through a bit of a view of what that looks like. So we've got one of our favorite Atlassians, Jerry, down in the corner. He's managed to leave his face on the screen, but I did remove the audio, which you won't be happy about. But what you can see here is we've actually built in Confluence Whiteboard a strategy on a page so that our teams annually, we go and to every team of teams produces a strategy on a page. We've now put embedded links in that template so that it auto-populates across focus, goals, Jira, our embedded system of work. So that workflow that I showed you before, we now go around. Our teams had been doing that in PowerPoint or whiteboarding tooling. It's a very small step for them to now continue to do this in a very similar way, but it is now automatically embedded into our tooling. So we're super happy with that shift for our teams. That means now we can build out the dashboards across the strategy collection, and we can now have our senior leadership. So we are currently working with our commercial CEO and our CIO around their leadership teams and what they need from a focus perspective, and that data will now be able to be auto-populated so that they can manage that across the strategy collection. How did we architect our standardized work breakdown? So as you can see, we've got those enterprise imperatives and strategic imperatives. They're set up in an OKR format, and that's directly built into Focus. We then have those team missions built into Focus as well, so that our executives can manage all of the several hundred missions that we have across our business and how that ladders up to strategy. Then we've obviously lined up the initiatives, epics, and the idea flow as well, and built all of that in our standardized work breakdown system. So if you go back to the system of work, this is why that step is so critical of building that aligned view of how your work flows. If you can get that, all of a sudden all your work is visible and all the data now ladders up from a strategy perspective, and that question of why are we doing this work, how does it align to strategy, goes away. It's automatically baked in and automatically baked into all of your tooling as well. Then you can get to the point where the ability to auto break down all of your work. If you've set really good strategy, really good missions, goals, and context, all of a sudden plan execution flows much more quickly. You'll remember we spoke about the circulatory system and connecting that system of work. Well, as you can imagine, across our SDLC, here's an example. We took those 85 artifacts and we got them down to 6 priority controls in our SDLC. We've baked all of the guardrails that we need, our architectural guardrails, our secure development life cycles, into our SDLC. An example of which here is within our quarterly plan, you'll see our architectural guardrails, you'll see our procurement guardrails, you'll see our brand and marketing guardrails. And we have built all of that into the out-of-the-box tooling as well, so that we have continuous compliance throughout our SDLC. And as you can imagine, what that unlocks for you is just the ability to build compliance agents that then just go across all of your work and ensure that you are continuously compliant in what you're doing. So again, that first step of actually building your system of guardrails and building those breaks takes a bit of work, but if you can do that, the ability to get a high degree of automation into what you're doing is absolutely unlocked. So, what have we seen from that? Our executive, I think one of the ways they're a bit different is this is not just a delivery challenge, this is not just a technology challenge, this is absolutely business critical for us as a business, and they've seen the benefit off of doing this. So our business margins have improved. We are more resilient as a business so that when those weather events happen, we've got the financial reserves and the ability to pivot our resources to be able to handle, a whole year's worth of claims volume in a matter of a few days or weeks or months. We've been able to pivot our investment because we've spent less time in our sort of run the business element. We have more ability to invest in growing the business and dealing with new capability. Shareholder return. I mean, that's a good-looking graph right there. 200% for a legacy business in a mature industry. Very good return. Our shareholders are very happy. They certainly aren't the only stakeholder to keep happy, but they're obviously a very critical one for what it is that we're doing. And again, it's come to the point where the system of work is not something that's off to the side. The system of work is delivering shareholder value for us as an organization. We've been able to digitize a lot more. So insurance has typically been in Australia a heavily call center driven business. When people have an incident, they tend to want to pick up the phone. It gets to the point where when you've got those high volume situations, we've had people fall asleep on the phone because they're waiting so long to get help with their home that is underwater. Our ability to digitize across this has been absolutely critical. And then the one I think we're most proud of is if you look at the employee NPS, our teams love working in this way. They love that the most manual and onerous tasks have been taken off them, and they love the fact that they're out there kicking goals all the time as well. How can you get there? One of the things that doesn't get talked about a lot is kind of how do you get the business case together? First thing we did was we looked at what's the size of the prize. So not just a total cost of ownership view, not just a how do we de-risk view. For Suncorp, we're investing $2 billion over the next 3 years. So we took that as the size of the prize for us to start. And we said, look, If we can take away, we know in execution, there's a certain amount of waste involved in executing. Let's say that number is 30 or 40%. We know we're not going to get that down to zero, but if we could take half of that out, all of a sudden it's a $100 million business case for us as an organization, and that's where we were able to get the investment for us to build the system of work. Because again, at that total system value, there's a huge financial and business upside in getting this right. So we then built the logic as to how we were going to attack it, and then built the kind of algorithm in terms of will that actually deliver the value that we were after. And you can see that sort of dotted line is the target we needed, and we're sitting well above that in terms of delivering on the benefit that we were after. So if you wanted a quick starter guide, I've just put this up there. I won't go through this in detail, but if you start here, I think that will get you a long way to your intelligent system of work. This is where I'd be starting just from a how do you align people, process, and some of the key tools. And then obviously from some of the announcements, the other thing I would add is obviously the software collection, really critical as well to the SDLC side of things. What were some of our key learnings? First is don't over-design, get the skeleton right. If you get those basic building blocks right, you can get in and get started because the behavioral change is always the longer element of this, so stopping getting started certainly isn't going to help you. Having said that, I've also done this in a few other organizations where we spent a lot of time trying to design this perfectly, and we ended up with a way over-designed approach, and in fact, implementing it became near impossible. Secondly, get help from people who've done this before. You're going to get stuck. You are absolutely going to get stuck along the way in implementing a system of work approach. Make sure you've got some people that have been stuck before and they can help you, those transformation ninjas, they can help you find the side door and the back door to get unstuck and ensure that what you're implementing doesn't become Frankenstein's monster. Embrace the challenge. There was a point in time where our teams called out, the term was governance rage. We had introduced a new approach. We still had the old approach. We had doubled the level of governance for them. The change pain was real and hard. Luckily, we had prepared our leadership for the fact that, look, year one's probably going to suck. You're not going to be too happy. You're going to hear lots of noise. Be ready for that, because guess what? By year two, we're going to start to see some real value, and partway through that, you won't even look back, and that was absolutely the pattern that we saw in going through that. It doesn't have to take decades. Like, it really took us a year to 18 months to see significant change. By the 18-month point, we had gone from 25 big projects a quarter to delivering 100 initiatives in a quarter by the sort of that first marking point of full year in. I think sometimes when we talk about transformation, we think it's going to take forever. You should see some pretty early returns, and it doesn't have to take forever to do that, even though it is a challenge. And lastly, when you're doing this, you're obviously going to start in particular areas, but take a big enough bite of the apple. Sometimes we start with one team or one subset of teams. I personally have found when you're talking to your executive, that's not often a big enough proof point. They need to see a larger proof point to that. We started with our home claims and motor claims businesses. That wasn't our entire business, but it was a big enough proof point that if it worked, it was very tough to kind of go backwards on that. And lastly, make sure you have some fun along the way. Look, the slides with the outcomes are really nice, but next quarter everyone forgets about that and you start over. What you really remember are the people you've worked with along the way and the memories you've had. And if you're not having fun doing something like this, I think that's always a good indicator that something's wrong in your approach. Thanks for listening.